Hi, Papa Yeager here with This Day in History. March 7th, 1965, on a day that is known as Bloody Sunday, white police officers unleashed violence on black protesters in Selma, Alabama. On this day, 600 African Americans gathered at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Their intention was to walk peacefully from Selma to Montgomery. They were commemorating the death of a 26-year-old deacon who was shot and killed by a white police officer. The protesters didn't get any further than the other side of the bridge. Once they crossed over, white police officers unleashed billy clubs, bullwhips, and tear gas and beat the protesters, 17 of whom ended up in the hospital. One of them was John Lewis. John Lewis was one of the leaders of the protesters. He ended up in the hospital. Other protesters didn't go to the hospital but were treated for injuries. The violence was shown on national television. It outraged President Johnson, who then got in front of the cameras and addressed the nation and said, "We need voter reform. Things aren't going to change unless we have equal access to the polls." 2 days later, on March 9th, Martin Luther King Jr. gathered with 2,000 people this time to protest, also intending to march all the way to Montgomery. This time, the protesters had the protection of the U.S. military. Remember, Johnson was in support of civil rights. He wanted change. This happened in 1965. It seems sometimes when you read history books like a long time ago, but it really wasn't. John Lewis went on to be a congressman from Georgia. He died the summer of COVID in 2020. And I remember watching on TV when they in a horse-drawn carriage, they carried his casket over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I cried then, I'm crying now, I'm sorry. I tend to be emotional. 2 years later, I took my family and I went on vacation and we went south. I wanted to do a civil rights, Civil War tour because you know me in history, I want to go to the places where things happen. And I took my son to Selma. I wanted him to see the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I wanted him to understand the history, that we live in a nation where if you weren't white, straight, male, you've had to fight for your rights. It's not something that was just given to you. And even though my son is a white boy, I want him to understand that not everybody has been blessed with that kind of privilege. So I took him to the bridge. We walked across the bridge. And when we were there, we were met with an older man who claimed to have been there. And he told us the story. Whether or not he was there, I appreciated this local person sharing the knowledge, his knowledge of the town, of the history with me and my son. I don't know if my son really wanted to be there, but he was. And now when he learns about the history books, when he learns history in class, it's not just going to be an event in the textbook. He'll be able to talk about the fact that he was there. And hopefully that will give him a little more understanding and empathy. I am concerned. We live in a nation that's inherently racist, homophobic. We tend to dislike people who are not, again, white, straight, male, or rich. There is a reason for DEI programs. We still need them. And taking them away is going to mean we're going backwards. DEI is in place because of events like Selma. Not everybody has always had equality in this country. And I'm appalled that we are actually going back. Anyway, that's This Day in History. March 7th, 1965. Bloody Sunday. Protesters, peaceful black protesters, were beaten by white police officers.